a vital structure which is composed of membrane and surrounding structures, which include your plasma membrane and the cell wall. Now, the cell wall provides structural support and protection for the bacteria. Additional layers in some species, some bacteria produce capsules or slime layers. Now, capsules and slime layers can protect the bacteria against desiccation or evade host immune responses or enhance adhesion to surfaces. An example of how capsule can evade immune responses will be avoiding phagocytosis. Slime layers, they are used for adhering to surfaces in the body and at the same time even in inanimate objects. Another structure of the prokaryotic cell or bacterial cell would be your plasma membrane or your cell membrane. It is a critical structure in bacteria with the following composition: a phospholipid bilayer, which contains embedded proteins that play roles in transport and signaling. Your plasma membrane is composed primarily of phospholipids and proteins with no sterols. Sterols are abundant in the bacteria family Mycoplasma like your Mycoplasma pneumoniae. It has no, sorry, it has no cell wall. It has a cell membrane, but instead of, sorry, phospholipids, we have sterols. Now, what is the function of your plasma membrane or cell membrane? It acts as an osmotic barrier by regulating the movement of substances in and out of the cell. That's their selective permeability. It performs functions similar to those in eukaryotic cells, such as energy production and nutrient transport. To elucidate the structure of your plasma membrane, so please help me locate where is your phospholipid bilayer. Sorry. This is your phospholipid bilayer. So the polar regions, it is made of hydrophilic heads, while the nonpolar region, hydrophobic tails. Your phospholipid bilayer provides a semi-permeable barrier for your bacterial cell. We have also proteins. Look at these proteins. Embedded membrane channel proteins and glycoproteins facilitate transport, signaling and cell recognition. We have also your carbohydrate chains found on the external membrane surface. They are often attached to glycoproteins or glycolipid. They play roles in cell signaling and adhesion. Then we have your cholesterol, the yellow ones. They're present to stabilize the membrane's fluidity and maintain integrity. Now, the cell wall is a defining feature of many bacteria, as we have mentioned a while back, as a basis for their staining characteristics. And we use that to classify bacteria into two large groups. If we use the gram stain, they could be a gram-positive bacteria or gram-negative. If you use your acid-fast staining like your Ziehl-Neelsen or your Quinions, then could be acid-fast bacteria or non-acid-fast bacteria. Can you give me an example of an acid-fast bacteria or acid-fast bacterium? Anybody?
Mycobacterium tuberculosis to.
Correct. Okay, Rods, 1 point for you. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. You have also your Mycobacterium leprae, the causative agent of your leprosy. Your Microbacterium avium intracellular, that is significant among HIV or immunocompromised patients. We have the gram-positive cell wall. We have thick peptidoglycan layer. The gram-negative, thin peptidoglycan layer with an outer membrane. Again, can you identify the substance equivalent to the outer membrane of a gram-negative cell wall? 1 point. Anybody? I mentioned that a while back.
Peptidoglycan, Doc.
No, it's your LPS,
Ay,
your lipopolysaccharide. Another cell wall is your acid fast. As I mentioned a while back, Mycobacterium species. Acid fast cell wall contains waxy lipids, making it resistant to staining. And then we have also the non-acid fast or the absence of a cell wall like your mycoplasma. They have sterols instead of peptidoglycan layer. Additionally, some pathogenic bacteria produce a capsule. A capsule is a highly organized protective covering that helps in evading host immune responses and enhancing virulence, as I mentioned earlier. The gram-positive cell wall is characterized by a peptidoglycan layer or your murine layer. It's a thick layer composed of glycan or polysaccharide chains. So these chains consist of alternating NAG or N-acetyl D-glucosamine and your NAM, N-acetyl D-muramic acid units forming a strong, rigid structure. Other components of the gram-positive cell wall, you have your teichoic acid, which provides structural stability and plays a role in ion transport. Then we have your lipoteichoic acid, which anchors the peptidoglycan layer to the cell membrane and contributes to cell wall integrity. Let me underscore again. This thick peptidoglycan layer is responsible for retaining the crystal violet stain. That's the primary stain in gram staining, giving gram-positive bacteria their characteristic color in gram staining. On the other hand, the gram-negative cell wall is distinct from a gram-positive counterpart due to inner peptidoglycan layer, which is thin but still can provide structural structure. Unique to gram-negative bacteria, this membrane contains an outer membrane. What are the composition of the outer membrane? Proteins, including porins that allow selective passage of molecules. Phospholipids, they're bilayer, remember? And your LPS, lipopolysaccharides, critical for immune system recognition. They are called your endotoxins. Gram-negative bacteria, they produce endotoxins. Gram-positive, they produce exotoxins. We will differentiate them um, later. The gram-negative cell wall has unique components and functions. Like your LPS, it is found only in gram-negative cell wall. So LP is regions include your antigenic O specific polysaccharide, which is critical for immune recognition and variability. Usually this is the somatic, it's in the body. And then you have your core polysaccharide, which provides structural stability to the lipopolysaccharide. And your lipid A, your endotoxin, which triggers strong immune responses and can cause endotoxin shock. Let's say you were infected with a gram-negative bacteria, it would produce an endotoxin. And that endotoxin would trigger symptoms in the body. It could be diarrhea, it could be rashes, it could be hemorrhage. So different effects of your endotoxin. While outer membrane functions, it serves as a barrier to hydrophobic compounds and harmful substances, including the antibiotics. So for bacteria, antibiotics are harmful. Also, they act as a sieve, allowing water-soluble molecules to pass through your porins. It will also enhance bacterial attachment to host cells, aiding in infection processes. This diagram represents the structure of the gram-negative cell wall, your Escherichia coli, and we have your peptidoglycan layer, which is composed of repeating units of N-acetylglucosamine and your N-acetylmuramic acid. These units are cross-linked by short peptide chains, including your alpha-alanine, your delta-glutamate, mesodiamino pimylate, and your delta-alanine. Now, the cross-linking will provide structural integrity and resistance to osmotic pressure while maintaining flexibility. Let's switch gears to the acid-fast cell wall, which has unique characteristics that distinguish it from gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. Now, the presence of mycolic acid, that's the glycolipid and fatty acid found in the acid-fast cell wall. This layer is strongly hydrophobic. It means to say it could resist, sorry, water-soluble substances and contribute to resistance to desiccation and many chemical treatments. Acid-fast bacteria are difficult to gram stain, but once you perform gram staining, they are lightly gram-positive. Remember that. Light purple, light violet. They could ask that in your licensure examination. Now, for acid-fast stain, that is the method of staining your acid-fast cell wall. It uses carbol-fuchsin. That's the primary stain instead of the crystal violet and gram staining, followed by an acid alcohol decolorizer. Now, the decolorizer for gram staining is ethanol or ethyl alcohol. Now, organisms like Mycobacterium species and Nocardia. Nocardia, they're slightly or partially acid fast. They retain the stain while others do not. Some bacteria, such as those in the genera Mycoplasma and Ureaplasma, they lack a cell wall. Now, what's the implication of having no cell wall? Now, they could have plasma membrane, and this plasma membrane will contain sterols that would provide stability and strength in the absence of a rigid cell wall. Also, they could exhibit pleomorphism. What is pleomorphism? Exhibition of various shapes. Without a cell wall, bacteria can exhibit different shapes, like Chinese character or palisading. These are all pleomorphism. The absence of a cell wall makes this bacteria naturally resistant to antibiotics like penicillin, which target cell wall synthesis. So that's would be the topic of the PowerPoint topic reading that I assigned. Penicillin will target the cell wall, production of the cell wall. But without a cell wall, penicillin could not penetrate the cell. Penicillin is an antibiotic and it has a lot of derivatives that we used even up to now. Other structures of your prokaryotes, you have your surface polymers such as your capsules. Now, capsules are organized structure made of polysaccharides or polypeptides. Capsules aid in adherence to surfaces and help bacteria evade phagocytosis, enhancing their ability to cause infections. Now, what is the recommended staining technique? Is your India ink stain. Now, the capsule will appear as a clear halo surrounding the cell. Sometimes the capsule is removed to detect somatic antigens. Somatic antigens, these are the antigen O. They are produced from the body of the bacteria. What is the process used to remove the capsule for serological typing? Boiling. We have also the cell appendages. These are external structures that play vital roles in movement or motility, attachment, as well as interaction with the environment. So let's start with your flagellum. That's the plural term. The singular will be flagella. These are external rotating filaments made of protein known as your flagellin. They are responsible for motility. Now, we could describe a cell with the presence or absence and the location of the flagella. So if there is a single flagellum at one end, how do you call it? It's called your monotrichous bacteria. How about a bacterium with no flagellum? Atrichus. How about multiple flagella in tuft or a tuft of flagella at one end? We call it your Lophotrichus. How about flagella distributed all around the bacterium? Peritrichus. While flagella at both ends, Amphitrichus. But if we have tuft of flagella on both ends, we called it your Amphilophotricus. Remember those terminologies, guys. Flagella. Let's have your pili. Singular, pilus. They are non-motile, long filamentous tubes made of protein also, pilin, for genetic exchange, like your conjugation Or we have also your um, pili used for attachment. So the type of pili for conjugation is known as your sex pili or your sex pilus. Another cell appendage is your fimbriae. They are made of hair-like protein and they specialize for adhesion to host cells or surfaces. So again, flagella for motility, pili for conjugation or attachment, and then your fimbriae for motility as well as attachment. So we're done with your prokaryotic cell. Let's proceed with your eukaryotic cell structure for fungi as well as your parasites. We would not include your algae. Excuse me, let me just drink some water, please. Sorry. Particularly the fungi and parasites of medical importance. Fungi are significant in clinical microbiology because they cause infections such as your candidiasis, it's a yeast infection, aspergillosis, as well as your cryptococcosis. We will know more about your pathogenic fungi in your clinical mycology next semester, hopefully. While your parasites, we already mentioned about your protozoans, as well as your roundworms or your helminth. Then we have also your tapeworms, your flatworms, and other parasites associated with infections. Now, the cytoplasm of eukaryotic cells contain a nucleus. Now, a nucleus has DNA in discrete chromosomes. We have also histones in the nucleus, which are proteins that organize and stabilize your DNA. Then a nucleolus is also inside the nucleus. It's a round, refractile body responsible for ribosomal RNA. And a small r and then your RNA synthesis. The nucleus is bound by a bilayered lipoprotein nuclear membrane, providing protection and regulation. Now we have also eukaryotic ribosomes. It is the site of protein synthesis, composed of an 80 Svedberg. For eukaryotic is 70 Svedberg. Now let's review three key structural components in eukaryotic as well as they are found also in prokaryotic cells. So both they have plasma membrane composed of a phospholipid bilayer with your embedded proteins. Again, they would contribute to semi-permeability. It's a barrier and regulates substance exchange. Your cell wall for both eukaryotic and prokaryotic provides rigidity and strength to the cell's exterior, maintaining shape and protecting against environmental stress. And then your flagella, as well as your cilia that we have described a while back. So we have already described this flagella and their locations. Now in prokaryotes, we observe two important cytoplasmic inclusions. We have your granules and your endospores, or the spores that we mentioned a while back. Granules are found in the cytoplasm. They serve as storage for glycogen Glycogen is your energy reserve. Glucose is converted into glycogen for storage. You have also carbon and energy storage, your polybeta hydroxybutyrate, and phosphate reserve, your polyphosphates. On the other hand, your endospores, such as those found in Bacillus as well as your Clostridium species, they are highly resistant to chemical agents. Also, extreme temperature changes, UV light, and desiccation. Remember, endospores are not involved in reproduction, but rather function as survival structures during harsh conditions. Now, I want you to go over this table. It summarizes the key differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. So, in terms of size, which are larger, prokaryotes or eukaryotes in terms of size?
Eukaryotes po.
Eukaryote.
Correct. In terms of the genetic material, which has a single circular DNA located in the nucleoid? Prokaryotes
Prokaryotes.
or
Prokaryotes.
Prokaryote.
eukaryotes? Very good. They possess organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplast.
Eukaryotes.
Eukaryotes.
Eukaryotes po.
Reproduce through binary fission.
Prokaryotes po.
Prokaryotes. Very good.
Prokaryotes.
Ribosomes have 80 Svedberg.
Eukaryotes.
Eukaryote. Very good.
Eukaryote.
Good. Flagella are complex with a whip-like motion.
Prokaryotes po.
Eukaryotes. Good. So please go over. So class representative, or you can just email your class representative about how many times you recited today. Thank you so much. Now let's proceed to bacterial morphology. What is bacterial morphology? This pertains to the shape, the arrangement of bacterial cells, and they are helpful for identification and classification. Guys, there are three primary shapes of your bacteria. Again, if it's spherical or oval shaped, we call them
Cock.
cocci or cocci. How about rod-shaped bacteria?
Bacilli.
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 Spiral-shaped bacteria. All right, I'll give you an example of a bacteria and tell me if it's a cocci, a bacilli, or a spirilla or spirochetes. All right. Streptococcus pneumoniae. Cocci. Escherichia coli.
Bacillus.
Good. Treponema pallidum.
Spirochetes po.
Spirochetes. Very good. Bacteria exhibit a wide range of sizes and shapes. For the typical bacterial size, it's 0.4 to 2 micrometers. So we need microscope. So I've already described a coccus, a bacillus, as well as a spirochete. So I'm showing you now here the different shapes as well as the arrangement. Now, if they are in clusters, we describe it as staphylococci. Chains, streptococci. Very good. Pairs,
Diplococci.
diplococci or diplococcus. How about a group of 4 cells?
Tetracocci.
Tetrads. Only, not tetracocci. Tetrads. How about short rods? Cocoa bacilli or bacilli. Tapered ends. Fusiform bacilli. Can you see that? Fusiform. How about they are side by side, arranged, rod shapes?
Palisades.
Palisading. An example is Corynebacterium. So Corynebacterium diphtheriae, the causative agent of diphtheria. Spirosheets. We have spiral or helical shape, such as your treponema, the causative agent of syphilis, and also your leptospirosis, Leptospira interrogans, the causative agent of leptospirosis. Now, these are the common stains used for microscopic visualization of bacteria and other microorganisms. We use the following gram staining technique. All right, I will describe and choose among these stains. Fungal cell walls under fluorescence microscopy. Anybody? It's your calcoflower white. A simple stain used for general visualization. Methylene blue. It differentiates bacteria into gram-positive and gram-negative based on cell wall structure.
Gram staining.
Gram stain. Identifies acid-fast organisms like Mycobacterium with high mycolic acid in their cell walls.
Acid fast.
Acid fast, very good. Highlights resistant spores produced by genera like Bacillus and Clostridium.
Endospore.
Endospore stain. Identifies capsules, especially in Cryptococcus species. So this is a fungus.
India ink po.
India ink, very good. Fluorescent stain used to detect nucleic acids in bacteria. Acridine orange. So let's describe the gram staining technique, which is a critical method for differentiating bacteria based on their cell wall structure, especially the presence of the peptidoglycan layer. So the first step, heat fixation. Why are we heating the bacterial smear? It will fix the bacterial smear to the slide. So you could hit it using a Bunsen burner or using a um, methanol. We have now the replacement of your Bunsen burner. These are your heaters, and they are uh, commercially produced. Next is your primary staining for 1 minute. And what is our primary stain? Your crystal violet. So it will stain the entire bacterial cell. And then add a mordant. What is the function of your mordant? It will allow the penetration of your crystal violet and fix it with inside the cell. So that is your primary stain and mordant complex. Next is your alcohol acetone or your ethyl alcohol. It will remove the primary stain, but because of the thick peptidoglycan layer, the crystal violet will stay in the cell wall of your gram-positive bacteria. If it's gram-negative, the crystal violet is decolorized. So it becomes colorless until you apply the secondary stain or the counter stain known as your safranin for 30 minutes. Now, if it's gram-positive, your safranin would not be absorbed by the cell wall. Why? Because the crystal violet was not decolorized. If it's a gram-negative, it will absorb the safranin because your crystal violet has been decolorized by your ethyl alcohol. Therefore, this will be the basis why we have a purple or violet color for a gram-positive bacterial cell and a pink color for a gram-negative bacterial cell. Now, can you identify what gram staining um, group is this one? A gram-positive or a gram-negative?
Gram positive.
Gram-positive.
Gram-positive.
Can you describe the shape of the bacterial cell?
Triangular.
Shape or elongated. Very good. How about this one? Gram-positive or gram-negative?
Gram negative.
Gram-negative. Pink in color. Look at its cocoa bacilli. Let's jump into the acid-fast stain. So we have two. Your Ziehl-Neelsen, that's the heat method or the hot method, and your Kinnean, which will make use of a detergent. While we have a fluorescence base, that's your Oramine rhodamine technique. So let's start with your Ziehl-Neelsen method. It uses heat to allow the stain to penetrate the waxy cell wall, so it could destroy the mycolic acid. Same with the detergent in your Kinnean. It will eliminate your mycolic acid. If we have crystal violet in gram staining, our primary stain here is your carbol fuchsin. And the color of that stain or dye is red. What is our decolorizer? It's acidified alcohol or acid alcohol, not acetone alcohol or ethyl alcohol used in your gram staining. It will remove the stain like the carbol fuchsin from a non-acid fast organism. And the counter stain or the secondary stain is your methylene blue. Maybe you have noticed we don't have any mordant for the Ziehl-Neelsen or Kinnean. Now, the only difference here is for Ziehl-Neelsen, you have to hit the smear. For the Kinnean, you need to apply a detergent. On the other hand, in your Oramine, rhodamine staining technique, a fluorochrome stain will enhance fluorescence. Therefore, you have to look for yellow or orange structures. And these are your acid-fast organisms. Acid-fast staining is useful for diagnosing tuberculosis as well as your leprosy. Now, guys, is this positive for acid-fast or negative? It is positive. Look at the bright red structures. So these are your acid-fast bacilli, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. How about this one? What staining technique has been used? It's your fluorochrome base or your Oramine rhodamine staining technique. The acid-fast bacteria appear bright yellow or orange, facilitating easier identification. Now the stain, the fluorochrome stain will combine with your mycolic acid in the cell wall. Now, what's the advantage of your auramine, rhodamine over Zil-Nielsen or Kinnian? Your auramine, rhodamine is more sensitive compared to your traditional Zil-Nielsen or Kinnian methods. Also, auramine, rhodamine will allow for rapid screening of samples, particularly useful in high burden settings for the diagnosis of tuberculosis and similar diseases. So your acridine orange is also a fluorescent dye. Instead of binding with mycolic acid, your acridine orange will stain your nucleic acids. And what would be the color? Bright orange under ultraviolet light. And this could detect the presence of viable as well as dead bacteria. Again, the principle is based on staining the nucleic acid of either a viable or living as well as your dead bacteria. It is particularly useful for locating bacteria in blood cultures and other specimens where detection is challenging due to low bacterial load. So can you identify the presence of bacteria here? Yellow or orange?
Orange.
Orange.
Bright orange. Also the yellow ones, they could also be indicative of the presence of bacteria. Calcoflower white, as I have mentioned, is used for fungal identification. Your calcoflower white will bind with your chitin. A chitin is a key component of your fungal cell walls. It will produce a bright apple green or blue-white fluorescence under UV light. Calcoflower white is highly specific and effective for detecting fungi in clinical specimens, making it a valuable tool in diagnostic clinical labs. So other stains, specialist stains used in microbiology with their specific purposes, like for your methylene blue, for metachromatic granules in Corynebacteria diphtheriae. So the presence of metachromatic granules is one of the distinguishing characteristics of your Corynebacterium diphtheriae. Cotton lactophenol cotton blue will stain the fungal cell wall blue. India ink, of course, it will um, prevent staining of capsules, creating a halo. This is a negative stain. And an example is your Cryptococcus neoformans. And then malachite green for endospores. All right. You can try to look at the granules pointed. This is in Corynebacterium diphtheria. Look at the granule being uh, pointed. This one is your lactophenol cotton blue, staining your Microsporum gypsum. Again, your lactophenol cotton blue will bind with your chitin in fungal cell walls. So it would show you your hyphae as well as your spores. Okay, this one you see a halo. This is your bacterial cell. This one is your India ink stain. So this is your Cryptococcus neoformans inside. And surrounding would be a capsule. India ink, by the way, is a negative staining. So aside from uh, blood and other bodily fluids, your CSF, we can employ India ink staining to diagnose cryptococcal meningitis. We are now moving into microbial growth and nutrition. These are the factors and conditions necessary for microorganisms such as bacteria to thrive and multiply. An example of growth requirements will be temperature, pH, oxygen levels, also carbon nutrients, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus. While nutritional types, based on their energy sources, carbon sources. So we would encounter here autotrophs, heterotrophs, phototrophs, chemotrophs. These are the concepts that we have to deal with. Microorganisms require specific nutrients to sustain growth and metabolism. Now, can we identify the major nutritional needs of bacteria or other organisms? We need carbon, essential for cellular components like proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. We need also nitrogen sources required for synthesizing proteins and nucleic acids. And then your ATP, which provides energy for cellular functions and biochemical reactions. You have also trace elements. So these are the elements needed by bacteria to grow. And guys, these are the basis of developing new culture media. What do bacteria need in order to grow or multiply? Phosphorus, sulfur, sodium, potassium, chloride, and calcium. These are required in small amounts but are vital for enzyme activity and maintaining cell structure. As discussed in the previous slide, microbes can be categorized based on their nutritional requirements for growth. Example, your autotrophs or your lithotrophs, they consume simple inorganic substances such as a nutrient source. Autotrophs are commonly found in environmental milieux such as soil and water. While your heterotrophs, they depend on complex organic substances for growth. They include bacteria that inhabit the human body, contributing to normal flora or pathogenesis. I already indicated the use of agar plate or your culture media. There are three different types of growth media used for cultivating organisms on this slide, and we have more on the succeeding slide. We have a minimal medium. It contains simple chemically defined components that provide essential nutrients. You have your nutrient medium made from extracts of meat or soybeans, offering a rich source of nutrients for microbial growth. And of course, your enriched media. They include additional growth enhancing ingredients like blood, like your blood agar play, vitamins, or yeast extract supporting the growth of fastidious organisms. In addition to basic media, specialized growth media serve specific purposes. Like your selective medium contains ingredients that inhibit the growth of some bacteria while promoting the growth of others. Example is media containing antibiotics to select resistant um, organisms. I mentioned about Bordet Gengo. I mentioned about chocolate agar for Neisseria species. While a differential medium allows for visualization of metabolic differences between groups or species, an example is your blood agar that would differentiate hemolytic and non-hemolytic bacteria. Then you have your transport medium, used to preserve specimens when there is a delay between collection and culturing. Serves as a holding medium to maintain sample viability. This specialized media are essential in diagnostics and microbial research. Now, are you still with me, guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. We now deal with the factors from the environment that would contribute to microbial growth. So let's start with your pH. Most human pathogens thrive at neutral pH, that's around pH 7. Microorganisms are categorized based on their temperature preferences. Like your psychrophiles grow in cold environments. So I've been repeating this one. How about a mesophiles? Moderate temperature, like just like our human body, mesophilic. And didn't you know that most of the pathogenic bacteria, they belong to the mesophilic classification, and then adapted to high temperature will be your thermophiles. Organism requiring oxygen for growth, we call it your strictly obligate aerobes, while a facultative aerobe can grow with or without oxygen, while an anaerobes obligate anaerobes cannot grow in the presence of oxygen, while your aerotolerant microbes can survive in oxygen but do not utilize it for growth. And then your capnophilic require an atmosphere enriched with extra carbon dioxide. And then your microaerophiles thrive in environments with reduced levels of oxygen, especially if you are living in highlands, high places where oxygen is depleted or diminished. The generation time, as I discussed a while back, refers to the time required for one cell to divide into two. So this would be the lag phase for the bacterial growth curve. For the lag phase, LAG, bacteria prepare for division by synthesizing necessary components. And then your log phase, rapid exponential growth occurs as bacteria divide at their maximum rate. And your stationary phase, nutrients become limited and the growth rate balances with the death rate. While the death rate is a non-viable cell outnumber viable ones due to depleted resources and accumulation of waste. All right, I'm going to show you here next structure, the log phase, exponential, the stationary, or the phase of the plateau, I'm sorry, and then the convalescent, or even it would result to the death phase. In the log phase, look at this one. Bacteria adapt to the environment and prepare for cell division. Exponential or the logarithmic growth, it would utilize cells and they divided their maximum rate. And then you have your stationary growth slows as nutrients are deployed and waste products accumulate. The number of viable cells remain constant. And then you have your death phase. Cells die off due to toxic conditions and lack of nutrients. All right, we are now switching gears into bacterial biochemistry and metabolism. So we will be dealing with the following: metabolism, fermentation and respiration, biochemical pathways from glucose to pyruvate, anaerobic utilization of pyruvate, or that's your fermentation, aerobic utilization of pyruvate or the oxidation, and carbohydrate utilization and lactose fermentation. So let's start with your microbial metabolism. Microbial metabolism involves biochemical reactions that enable bacteria to break down organic compounds for energy. Also, synthesis of new bacterial molecules necessary for growth and replication. All these reactions rely on the pressure and availability of specific enzymes. Additionally, bacteria utilize a variety of compounds as substrate, producing different end products based on their metabolic pathways. These processes are fundamental to bacterial survival and pathogenicity. Look at this diagram, guys. It will illustrate how pyruvate is central to various fermentation pathways in microorganisms. So pyruvate, look at this one. Pyruvate fermentation produces L and D lactic acid. This one. Now, what would be formed with alcohol fermentation? It will form ethanol and carbon dioxide. So other pathways can form propionic acid, succinic acid, acetic acid, butyric acid, and various alcohols like butanol and isopropyl alcohol. How about fermentation? Is this an aerobic process or an anaerobic process? Fermentation.
Anaerobic.
Anaerobic. It means to say
Anaerobic.
we don't need oxygen for this process. Now, an anaerobic obligate organism cannot survive in oxygen, while a facultative anaerobic, it can grow in oxygen or without oxygen. For an aerotolerant anaerobes, it can tolerate oxygen but don't use it. So in fermentation, the electron acceptor is an organic compound, while it allows microorganisms to generate energy. It is less efficient compared to respiration. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue exploring the two types of respiration, aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the most efficient energy-saving process. Here, molecular oxygen serves as the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain or ETC. While your anaerobic respiration, certain anaerobic organisms utilize inorganic forms of oxygen, such as nitrate or sulfate, as the electron, final electron acceptors instead of molecular oxygen. These processes highlight how microbes adapt to environments to produce energy efficiently. So these are the three biochemical pathways responsible for the conversion of glucose to pyruvic acid. Your EMP pathway, Embden-Meyerhof-Parnas, is similar to your glycolytic pathway, which is the most familiar process of glucose breakdown. While the pentose phosphate pathway, they do not generate energy. They also provide immediates for nucleotide and amino acids. While your Entner-Dororov pathway, Entner, it's an alternative pathway primarily observed in certain bacteria Each of these pathways play a critical role in cellular metabolism and energy production. Next, let's delve into your Embden-Meyerhof-Parnas metabolic pathway. It's a major pathway in the conversion of glucose to pyruvate. Here's what makes it significant. It's the primary pathway for glucose and metabolism generating pyruvate. It produces reducing power in the form of your nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide dehydrogenase, which is critical for other metabolic processes. It generates ATP, the energy currency of the cell. Your EMP, I'm sorry. This is an anaerobic pathway, meaning it does not require oxygen and is widely utilized by many bacteria, including all members of the Enterobacteriaceae family. So this is like a complicated EMP glycolytic pathway with a detailed biochemical process begins with D6. All right, so it would start with your glucose, which undergoes phosphorylation to form what? Your D-glucose 6-phosphate 6. It will progress to become your D-fructose 1,6 diphosphate. Now this molecule is cleaved into 3 carbon intermediates. We have first is your dihydroxyacetone phosphate and your D-glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. During the pathway, ATP is generated via substrate level phosphorylation and NADH is produced serving as reducing power. So what would be our final product for the EMP glycolytic pathway? It would be ethanol. It would be lactate. It would be acetaldehyde and your carbon dioxide. Now your pathway will undergo further, like with your Krebs cycle. How about your pentose phosphate pathway? This is also known as your phosphogluconate pathway. It's an alternative to EMP pathway, leading to the production of ribulose 6,5-phosphate. This intermediate is crucial for generating 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 carbon sugars. Also, it's a biosynthesis precursors. So the sugars produced are vital for nucleotide production and other metabolic processes. Then energy and reducing power. While the ATP yield is lower compared to the EMP pathway, this pathway excels in producing NADPH or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. It's a key reducing agent for anabolic reactions, including fatty acid and nucleotide synthesis. How about your Entner-Dororov pathway? It's a lesser known glycolytic pathway, wherein it would start with the conversion of glucose. So in this pathway, glucose 6-phosphate instead of glucose is converted into pyruvate and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Now the energy yield for your Entner-Dororov pathway, it would generate 1 NADPH per molecule of glucose, and it uses 1 ATP in the process. Although it cooperates aerobically, the Entner-Dororov pathway is commonly utilized by Pseudomonas alkaligenes or alkali genes and your Enterococcus faecalis and other bacteria lacking specific glycolytic enzymes found in the more typical EMP or pentose phosphate pathway. So remember about Pseudomonas. We have Pseudomonas aeruginosa, alkaligenes, as well as your Enterococcus faecalis. This pathway, Entner-Dororov pathway, provides an alternate means of generating energy, especially for organisms in environments where other glycolytic pathways may not be sufficient. So this would be your alternative microbial pathways for glucose fermentation. And we have already discussed about your EMP. We have already discussed about your pentose phosphate pathway or your PPE. We have alternative products of these pathways. We have acetaldehyde produced can be converted to ethanol via NADH, while your pyruvate can lead to acetate production as an alternative final product. Additionally, pyruvate can enter other fermentation pathways to produce lactic acid and acetate, as you can see in this um, diagram. So again, this one, Embden-Meyerhof-Parnas pathway. And you would be producing ethanol. Look at the ethanol production. This one from acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde, this one is from pyruvic acid. So these are the other fermentation pathways, and we would be discussing them one by one, starting with your alcoholic and homolactic fermentation, starting with your alcoholic, used by yeast to ferment glucose into ethanol. It is less directly relevant to human health, but important in industrial mycology for producing alcohol-based disinfectants like the alcohol that used in pharmaceuticals. How about homolactic fermentation? Used by Streptococcus and Lactobacillus. Sounds familiar, Lactobacillus. These are good bacteria inhabiting our GIT, gastrointestinal tract, as well as in the vagina of our females. The end product of your homolactic fermentation is lactic acid. Now, Streptococcus is the causative agent of what? Strep throat, endocarditis, while your lactobacillus could maintain pH balance in the gut as well as in your vaginal indigenous microflora, preventing pathogenic growth. How about heterolactic fermentation used by Lactobacillus um, species? Again, end product would be lactic acid, carbon dioxide, alcohols, formic acid, and acetic acid. As I mentioned a while back, it will maintain acidic pH in the gut and vaginal tract. How about your prioponic fermentation? Used by your Propionibacterium or your Cutibacterium acnes. End product is your prioponic acid. It contributes to acne development via inflammatory byproducts. It also understands its role in targeted treatments like antibiotics or probiotics. And then we have your mixed acid fermentation used by selected gram-negative rods, such as those that belong to your Enterobacteria CAA, like your Escherichia coli, Klebsiella pneumoniae, um, um, what else? You have your Shigella, Salmonella, Enterobacter, Kingella. So these are all members of your Enterobacteria. Si Edwardshella. Key end products of your mixed acid fermentation, lactic acid. Look at lactic acid. It's almost like a common denominator. Acetic acid, succinic acid in your formic acid. Common in pathogenic bacteria like Escherichia coli and Shigella. Produces acidic byproducts, aiding in colonization and pathogenesis in the human host. Diagnostically significant in identifying Enterobacteriaceae members through biochemical testing, such as your methyl red testing. And then we have your butanediol and butyric acid fermentation. Your butanediol fermentation used by select gram-negative bacteria in the Enterobacteriaceae family, such as Klebsiella as well as Enterobacter. Now, this Klebsiella and Enterobacter, they are opportunistic pathogens causing infections like pneumonia and UTIs, urinary tract infection. This will help differentiate these organisms in diagnostic tests, such as your Voges-Proskauer test. While your butyric acid fermentation used by obligate anaerobe. So these organisms, they absolutely die in the presence of oxygen. So the end products will be butyric acid, acetic acid, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen. This is seen in Clostridium species such as your Clostridium difficile, which causes antibiotic-associated colitis. Remember that, Clostridium difficile. The production of butyric acid contributes to tissue damage and inflammation during infections. So this is now your Krebs cycle, wherein your pyruvic acid is oxidized during aerobic respiration. It produces energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, generates acids and carbon dioxide as byproducts. So central to energy metabolism in aerobic bacteria as well as eukaryotic cells. It's a target also for antibiotics or metabolic inhibitors to disrupt energy production in pathogens. And your Krebs cycle helps differentiate between aerobic and anaerobic bacteria in clinical diagnostics. So this is your Krebs tricarboxylic acid cycle, your TCA cycle. TCA cycle, once again, is a central metabolic pathway where pyruvate produced from glycolysis is oxidized. So the pyruvate from glycolysis is oxidized to produce energy. And energy is your ATP. The process is called your ATP production via oxidative phosphorylation. So the key steps of your TCA cycle, your pyruvate is converted to your acetyl coenzyme A. Your acetyl coenzyme A enters the cycle producing carbon dioxide, NADH, FADH2, and ATP or GTP. And electron carriers, such as your NADH, FADH2 transfer electrons to the electron transport chain. Again, what is the relevance of your TCA cycle? Fundamental for energy production in aerobic bacteria and human cells. Disruptions in the cycle can indicate metabolic disorders or be exploited by certain pathogens. That's your Krebs tricarboxylic acid cycle or your TCA cycle. Again, for aerobic bacteria, bacteria needing oxygen to grow and survive, and also human cells. Now we have the carbohydrate utilization and lactose fermentation role in Enterobacteriaceae. So lactose fermentation differentiates organisms. We have your beta-galactosidase permease, which transports lactose into the bacterial cytoplasm. And then we have your beta-galactosidase, which breaks your lactose into glucose and galactose, enabling fermentation. So we have lactose fermenters and the non-lactose fermenters. And what agar plate do we use? It's your McConkey agar, remember that. We have two routine agar plates, blood agar plate or the sheep blood agar, and your McConkey agar. Now your McConkey agar, once again, it is based on lactose fermentation. An example of a lactose fermenter is your Escherichia coli. Example of a non-lactose fermenter will be your Salmonella or Shigella. Bacteria capable of fermentation, lactose fermentation, can also ferment glucose, as glucose metabolism is a more universal pathway. This will be our last topic on bacterial genetics, the study of genetic material, specifically your DNA in bacteria, and how it influences their traits and functions. So let's describe the anatomy of DNA and RNA molecules. I'm sure that you have taken this one in your biochemistry previously, so it's a review. So in terms of structure, both DNA and RNA have a backbone of phosphate and pentose sugar linked to nitrogenous bases. For DNA, what is that pentose sugar? It's deoxyribose sugar. That's why it's DNA. For RNA, it's the ribose sugar. How about the nitrogenous bases? We have purines. What are these purines? Adenine or guanine. And then your pyrimidines. What is T? Thymine, uracil, and your cytosine. So when you pair them, adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, that's your DNA. Adenine, uracil, cytosine, guanine, that's your RNA. So the difference, thymine for DNA and uracil for RNA. DNA forms a double helix structure stabilized by hydrogen bonds between complementary bases, while your RNA is typically single-stranded but may fold into complex structures. Again, showing you just the nitrogenous bases. So you have here your cytosine, thymine, uracil, adenine, and your guanine. So this is how it looks like. Look at your structure B. Look at the hydrogen bonds, especially in your DNA structure. Let's define DNA. The function of the DNA is to store genetic information essential for growth, reproduction, and cellular functions. In terms of replication, DNA produces identical copies of DNA during cell division, ensuring genetic continuity. What is an RNA? It is produced by the synthesis of the transcription of DNA. We have your messenger RNA acts as a template for protein synthesis during translation. So a mutation in DNA can lead to genetic disorder or cancer. We have also RNA-based therapeutics like your mRNA vaccines are revolutionizing medicine by targeting specific diseases. Another term is your translation. mRNA is read by ribosomes to produce proteins. And then a codon is a sequence of 3 nucleotides on mRNA that codes for a specific amino acid. While your tRNA, translational RNA, matches codons on mRNA with their corresponding anticodon and carries appropriate amino acid for protein assembly. While your protein is functional unit of cells expressed as the result of genetic information. What is the role of protein? Catalyzes biochemical reactions, provides structure, and regulates physiological processes. So what are the significant genetic elements and alterations? So let's start with the bacterial genome. It's a single closed, circular, double-stranded DNA. So it's a double-stranded DNA molecule which is supercoiled to fit within the bacterial cell. While plasmids, these are extra chromosomal elements. These are independent circular DNA molecules carrying genes for antibiotic resistance, virulence, or other functions. So they code for antibiotic resistance. They code for virulence to become pathogenic. While your mobile genetic materials, you have your mutation, changes in the DNA sequence that may affect bacterial traits such as antibiotic resistance. And then genetic recombination, it is the exchange or transfer of genetic material between DNA molecules, generating new gene combinations. So what's the medical relevance of these genetic elements in bacteria? Plasmids and mutations drive the spread of antibiotic resistance among bacteria. So that's good for them. While genetic recombination mechanism like conjugation and transduction, they are key in understanding bacterial adaptation and pathogenesis. Excuse me. So we have here your types of mutation. But before that, what is a mutation? A mutation is a change in the DNA code that may affect protein synthesis or function. Types of mutation, we have your point mutation, which is a change in a single nucleotide, such as your substitution. While another type of mutation is your insertion or deletion. It is the addition or removal of nucleotides, potentially causing frame shift mutations. What would be the effect? Altered or non-functional proteins, and it can contribute to antibiotic resistance or increased virulence. Therefore, the bacteria can become more pathogenic. How about genetic recombination? Initially, you have discussed this one, but let's define it more in depth. Genetic recombination is a transfer exchange of genes between homologous, that's similar regions on two DNA molecules. And this will result in the formation of new combinations of genes, which will enable bacteria to adapt to environmental changes by acquiring new biochemical pathways. And our second to the last slide, mechanisms on how genes are transferred from one bacterial cell to the other. So let's start with transformation. It's the uptake and incorporation of naked DNA from the environment into a bacterial genome. While transduction, it is the transfer of genetic material mediated by a bacteriophage. A bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria. So the virus carries the gene and it could transfer into the infected bacteria. While conjugation is the direct transfer of genetic material from a donor to a recipient bacterial cell through a sex pilus. Remember what I told you, through a physical connection through a sex pilus. While restriction enzymes, they recognize specific DNA sequences and cut foreign DNA to protect against infection. So transformation. The DNA is in the environment and the bacteria is passing through, it could take up your DNA. Again, this is key in acquiring antibiotic resistance. How about B? This is your virus infecting a bacterial cell. So it's injecting the viral DNA into the new bacterial cell. So the bacteriophage, the virus, serves as a vector for transferring genetic material from one bacterial cell to the other. How about C? So the first one is conjugation. Direct transfer of plasmid between bacteria using a sex pilus or a conjugative pilus. Now, look at this one. This is the donor, F positive cell. It will donate the DNA into a F negative cell. So assuming like this is a gene. So therefore, when you transfer that F gene, your previously F negative cell will also acquire the F gene. Therefore, conjugation has been initiated and achieved. So three ways, again, to transfer DNA materials through transformation, transduction using a bacteriophage, and conjugation using a pilus or a sex pilus or conjugative pilus. That ends our long lecture. Again, I did my best to cover all the concepts contained in that PowerPoint presentation, but please supplement it with um, reading. If you have any questions about it, you could email me directly or relay through your class representatives. It's tiring to be talking for almost 3 hours, but I'm happy to share this key information. I did not want to miss um, lecturing on this topic because this is foundational concepts that you have to remember. Well, the other topic could be good for reading, though I would still be uploading a podcast to supplement it. Guys, thank you so much. Andre, please update me on the conduct of your quiz number 2. I appreciate your help as well as the other class representatives. Again, if you have any concerns, any questions, you could just email me. I will try my best to respond to you the soonest time possible or relay it with your class representative. Bye for now, guys. Have a wonderful